Okay, so welcome back, everybody. So this is session 2 in a 2-part defined contribution pension series. So again, I mentioned that we're recording. I'm going to say it again just because a couple people just joined, so that we're able to post these sessions on the Society's e-learning website. Everybody's lines have been muted to prevent background noise. And like yesterday, I just mentioned this, we are going to be holding the question and answer period at the end of the session. The chat's going to be open, so you feel free to converse with each other. And then again, if you require any type of clarity or clarification from Laura during her presentation about perhaps something that she's just said or something on a slide, please type it in the chat or send a direct message to me, and I will go ahead and seek that clarification for you. So yesterday, when we kicked off the session, we invited you all to locate whose land you were participating from by using the nativeland.ca website. So today we're asking that if you're able to, if you're not calling in from a phone and you don't have to change too many screens to get there, we're asking that you share which land, which Indigenous territory you are on in the chat with your location. So that we can learn a little bit more about the Indigenous lands that surround our places of work and our homes. So just as an example, I am in Whitby, and I am on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississauga peoples. So we have another great session lined up for you today. Laura has given me little bits of tidbits, highlights of information, so it's going to be a great session. I know that a lot of work went into prepping this, and Laura's very eager to get started to make sure that we have time to answer questions at the end of the session. So we, as promised, are going to kick off today's session with a few of the questions that came in as folks logged off yesterday afternoon. So are you ready for those, Laura?
I am.
Okay. So one of the questions that came in was, what is the rule of 82?
Well, the rule is really shorthand we use in the pension community for eligibility for an unreduced pension. So this is part of subsidized early retirement, that if people age plus their years of service equals 82, then they are eligible for an unreduced pension, even if they are younger than the normal retirement age, which is typically 65.
Okay. And then a follow-on to that, I guess a segue, is how does bridging work with a defined benefit plan?
So a bridge pension is not one of the statutory requirements. It is not a minimum standard under the Pension Benefits Act, but many pension plans, defined benefit pension plans, do provide a bridge. And this is for people who do take early retirement, either due to reaching their rule or to reaching age 55, that they have a pension additional supplement that kicks in until they reach age 65, that is designed to replace the piece that is missing from Canada Pension Plan. So the assumption is that you'll start your CPP when you're 65, and you'll get this bridge pension to fill the gap until then. So the gap between your actual retirement date and age 65.
Awesome, thank you. And just as a clarification, Althea sent me a message saying that, just as a reminder, some of us have a rule of 85, but it's the same principle.
No, that's just an example. I mean, some people have rule of 90. Yeah. Some people, so there are combinations of 60 plus 20, so that if you're age 60 and have 20 years, you can go with an unreduced pension. So these are negotiated typically between unions and employers as to what those early retirement subsidies are going to look like.
Great. Okay, well, those were the questions that I had from yesterday. So I will hand it over to you to start, but I'm just, sorry, 1 second. There's a question in the chat about, is this session 2 or session 1? This is session 2. Yesterday was session 1. There is a recording for session 1. The recordings for today and yesterday will be posted later this week on the Society's e-learning site. And if you registered for either session, the defined benefit, or this session, defined contribution, you will receive an email with instructions, a notification that the presentations have been posted, and the video, the recordings have been posted, and we will also provide instructions on how to access that for you. So it is completely up to you if you'd like to stay for this recording or for this session. If you'd like to log off and watch session 1 first and do them in order, that's up to you. That's fine as well. So. Okay, Laura, I think that's it for clarification in the chat for the moment. So I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Okay, and just I believe that the person who asked the question, Renee, was wondering if session 1 was in some way required in order to understand session 2. And I would say the answer to that is no. It's not a prerequisite. It's background information.
There you go. Thank you, Laura.
So are we ready?
Yeah, you're good to go.
All right, let's see if I can make this happen. Okay, I'm ready to start. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of our pension discussion. I do want to start by addressing the fact that for the most part, our target audience for this presentation, in other words, members of defined contribution plans, that audience is mostly missing from the room today. Until recently, all society represented employees participated in defined benefit pension plans. Thanks to the energy and effectiveness of our organizing team, in recent years, we have added new locals that participate in defined contribution pension plans and group RSPs. We have been working hard to ensure that the needs of these new members are addressed, as well as the needs of our members in legacy defined benefit plans. But we could take some lessons from our organizers in how to reach these people. Most of you in attendance today participate in defined benefit plans, but maybe you have a partner with a defined contribution plan, or perhaps you're simply interested in learning about them. Either way, the focus today is on defined contribution and group RSPs, and we invite you to stay if this topic is of interest to you. A version of this slide was part of yesterday's presentation, but I've customized it for this session. The last bullet represents the elephant in the room for capital accumulation plans such as defined contribution pension plans and group RSPs. Can your capital accumulation plan combined with the Canada Pension Plan and OAS get you to that 70% goal? Capital accumulation plans, like lottery tickets, do not come with guarantees. Employees with defined benefit plans have already sort of won the lottery. Defined benefit plans are rare and valuable, but your defined contribution plan or group RSP, if managed properly, is way better than a lottery ticket and much better than having no pension at all. These plans can make an important contribution to your retirement income. But managing these funds properly is a challenge for most people, and there are better alternatives available at no additional cost or risk to your employer. And we're going to spend some time later this morning talking about that. Most defined contribution plans and all group RRSPs are capital accumulation plans. The reason why the second bullet point here says most is that some defined contribution plans in Canada offer pooled accounts and professional investment management. And so those are not capital accumulation plans. The definition of a CAP is that they are tax-assisted savings plans that permit plan members to make investment decisions among 2 or more options offered within the plan. There are some features that are common to most workplace capital accumulation plans. And now I'm talking about both defined contribution accounts and group RSPs. Everybody has their own account, individual accounts. The contributions are tax deferred up to the Income Tax Act limit of 18% of earnings. And that's up to a cap, which is $29,000 and change for 2022. So you can't contribute any more than that in a given year. The plan sponsor / administrator, which usually is your employer or their delegate, they select the fund options offered within the plan. And as an employee, you are responsible for choosing which of those funds to invest in. It's important to point out that the income tax 18% limit applies to workplace plans and your individual RSPs combined, or if you've got an element of both in your workplace, it's the combined total. So the amount contributed by employer and employees to a capital accumulation plan that reduces the individual's RSP maximum contribution room in a given year. For capital accumulation plans that are registered pension plans, in other words, covered by the applicable pension legislation, the plan administrator has a fiduciary obligation to the beneficiaries. This is incredibly important, that they must act in the beneficiary's best interests. CAPSA, which we learned about yesterday, which is a group that provides guidance and support and advice to the pension community, they advise that this means that there must be a diverse range of investment options that suit every person's individual profile. So you've got to have aggressive growth funds, everything from there ranging to balance funds to maybe a money market or fixed income funds. They have to consider how well the funds have performed in the past and are projected to perform in the future. They have to think about the demographics of the employee group, because you'll probably have younger employees that might typically go for a more aggressive equity-based plan compared to older employees that might be wanting to de-risk. They also have to look at the fees and costs of these funds as compared to what they are in the market. In a registered plan, they should be lower. The employers typically wear two hats. They act as the plan sponsor and the plan administrator. Most employers do engage a third party, which is often an insurance company, to provide administrative support, but the employer, as the plan administrator, retains the fiduciary obligation. A capital accumulation plan typically has a default fund. That means that if the employee hasn't made an election, then that's where the money is put. This has been very problematic for defined contribution plans. Historically, the default fund has been a money market fund, and of course, the returns on those are quite low, and over time, it leads to inadequate outcomes for retirement income. CAP administrators are increasingly moving away from these default funds as being low interest fixed income into a target date fund. That's a really intriguing concept, because what it does is it takes into account the employee's age, where they are in their career. So a target date fund is completely hands-off for the employee, and what it does is automatically invest in high growth, high risk securities in the early years, and they de-risk as the employee approaches retirement age. And the outcomes with these target date funds are vastly better for producing retirement income. The regulators have encouraged and issued guidelines encouraging plan administrators to adopt these target date funds as the default fund. I've put together a table showing some of the key differences between defined contribution registered pension plans and group RSPs. And for society, I think many of our employers now offer some elements of both. Often there's a combination where they'll have a registered plan and also an optional RSP program. Sometimes with matching contributions, usually matching. So big differences here is that the plans registered under the Pension Benefit Act are actually pension plans. Whereas the group RSP is not, is only registered with the Canada Revenue Agency. Contributions, this is quite an important distinction. Under a registered defined contribution plan, the employer must contribute at least 1%. It can't be entirely employee funded. Not true for the group RSP. Also, vesting, we do happen to have immediate vesting now in Ontario, meaning that you get the full value of your pension regardless of how early you leave employment, and that's always been the case for group RSPs. This slide continues showing the difference between these two types of caps. It goes to the heart of the difference between these two types of plans. A registered defined contribution plan is subject to all of the rules and standards under the Pension Benefits Act. In contrast, a group RSP is simply a retirement savings vehicle and offers much more flexibility. This row at the top is hugely important. If you've got your money in an individual defined contribution account, you really, except for very limited exceptions, which we'll talk about, you can't get your hands on that money. It can only be transferred into another locked-in vehicle. If you have money in a group RSP, you can take it out. You have to pay tax, but you can take it out. Another statutory requirement for registered pension plans is that the spouse must be the beneficiary unless they sign a waiver. A group RSP, the employee can declare anyone as a beneficiary. And then again, the retirement options, the big differences between locked in or not locked in. So with a defined contribution plan, once you do reach retirement, the funds must be transferred into some kind of retirement vehicle that only allows you to withdraw certain amounts so that you're not spending it all at once or using it all at once. With the RSP, again, you can take out as much as you want. And then here we see some of the features that I think we're all familiar with in registered retirement savings plans. You can have a spousal plan, you can use it to buy a first home, you can use it to fund an education by withdrawing amounts and then paying it back over time. Those options are not available under a registered pension plan. It's important to note that the biggest difference, which is whether the funds are locked in or not, there's an upside and a downside. Pension legislation requires locking in to ensure that the funds are used for their intended purpose, which is to provide income in retirement. Plan members cannot dip into these registered funds for other purposes. For the most part, that is considered to be good public policy. An unfortunate exception is the case of low-wage workers. A registered plan is a tough sell for them because a lot of them need the flexibility just to get by. We see that sponsoring a registered pension plan comes with more responsibility and even more liability for an employer. So I asked myself the question, well, why is it then that they so often choose to provide a real pension plan rather than a group RSP? I think the answer to that is that most employers prefer to provide a registered pension plan that is guaranteed to provide income for their employees in retirement. In other words, they're willing to accept responsibility for helping with retirement, but less willing to just provide employees with what could be considered just extra cash. Here's where we start to get into some of the acronyms that can be confusing. So we might as well just take the plunge. First of all, let's talk about what happens if you leave your employment before you are eligible to retire. And that is at age 55 in Ontario. The normal age is 65, but everyone is entitled to retire as early as 10 years before that for Ontario regulated plans. So if that happens, termination before retirement eligibility, the money in the individual's account must either remain in that account or be transferred into a locked-in retirement vehicle. Again, now this is just for registered defined contribution plans. Examples of locked-in retirement vehicles are you can purchase a deferred annuity, which essentially pays a pension for life. You can transfer funds into your new employer's pension plan, or you can transfer funds into a LIRA, a locked-in retirement account. If the funds are transferred into a LIRA, the individual continues to be responsible for managing the investments in that account. Withdrawals not allowed until retirement. There are exceptions to that. If there's a very small balance, if you have a shortened life expectancy, if you have not been a resident of Canada for, I think, 2 years, and there is a more recent option, within 60 days, you can elect to transfer 50% from your LIRA into either an RSP or a RIF, a Registered Retirement Income Fund. And we'll talk more about that later, but those provide the flexibility to withdraw as much money as you want. So you do actually have flexibility with 50% of it. As indicated earlier, termination options are much more flexible for funds in a group RRSP and can also include transfers into an RSP or a RIF. Now we get to the real challenge, how to convert the accumulated funds into retirement income. There is an ongoing high level of concern about how to turn a defined contribution account into a pension when an employee retires. And basically, you're just looking at a pot of money, which represents the contributions and the investment returns over a career. In the pension world, we call the retirement phase the decumulation phase, which of course is the opposite of accumulation. That actually is a word. I don't think it always was, but someone has decided it's a word. And it is defined as the drawdown of savings to provide an income stream in retirement. Sounds simple, but not so much. Here are some of the challenges. So as we know, a plan like a defined contribution plan or a group RSP does not produce a defined benefit. It is just money. If the retiree draws down the funds too quickly, they could outlive their money. And unfortunately, this can lead to behavior where the retiree is afraid to spend. They draw down the funds too slowly and are not able to fully enjoy the retirement that they have earned. And that is not only bad for the retiree, but it's bad for the economy. They can purchase an annuity. That's a sure thing. But when you buy an annuity, you're buying a pension, but they are expensive, particularly in the historic low rate environment that we have had. Not so much though in today's rising interest rate environment. And we are actually starting to see that annuities are going to start to become an important piece of retirement planning. Having said that, most people do not buy annuities and they prefer to transfer their funds into a life income fund or a registered retirement income fund in the case of a group RSP when they're ready to retire. So the life income fund is a locked-in fund. The RIF is not a locked-in fund. This has to happen before the end of the year that you turn 71. And the reason for that is that the CRA wants their money. You haven't paid any tax on these funds up until now, but you're retiring and tax is payable on the amounts withdrawn. So here's some more important difference between the locked-in fund and the not locked-in fund. The LIRA funds go into a LIF. These are locked in. And as such, they are subject to minimum and maximum withdrawals. In other words, they force you to take out a certain amount so that the CRA will get their tax, but they also limit how much you can take out, which is consistent with the policy objective of making sure this money is used for retirement income. In contrast, RRSP funds are transferred to a RIF, which are only subject to minimum withdrawal requirements, consistent with the flexibility of an RSP. And these minimum withdrawals for both types of funds increase as you get older. There's more to think about than just managing your workplace plan when you're preparing for retirement. It's important to look at the total picture, and here's some elements of that total picture. You've got to actively apply for and start accessing your entitlements under the Canada Pension Plan, the Old Age Security Program, and any pensions and annuities that you might have. Tax planning is very tricky. You've got taxable, tax-deferred funds, such as your RSP, and you've got tax-exempt assets, and you have to manage all that within the minimum withdrawals and thinking about your tax rates. And you also have to think about covering healthcare costs, which could include long-term care. You might need to think about tapping into your home equity. There are going to be things that you have no control over but you have to plan for, market returns, inflation, and how long you're going to live, and also estate planning if you wish to leave some of your assets to your heirs. Is there a better way to provide a workplace pension, a better way than defined contribution plans or group RSPs? I think the answer to that is yes. There has been a massive shift away from traditional single employer defined benefit pension plans into defined contribution plans due to the increased level and volatility of defined benefit plan costs. There are several large and very successful jointly sponsored defined benefit plans in the public sector. You've probably all heard of HOOP, that's healthcare, OMERS, which is municipal workers, teachers, which is teachers. But until recently, there have been few alternatives to defined contribution in the private sector and the broader public sector. That is starting to change. Employers loved defined benefit plans when they were all running large surpluses in the 1990s. But as we talked about yesterday, when the perfect storm hit, market downturns, low interest rates, increased longevity, employers were experiencing increased costs and a high degree of contribution volatility. And that's because employers bear all of the risks as sponsors of defined benefit plans. We saw this yesterday, but I think it's important to review in advance of this discussion about alternatives. Here we have, at opposite ends of the spectrum, the two traditional types of workplace pension plans, defined contribution, defined benefit. The key problem with defined benefit plans for employers is that the employers bear all of the risk and all of the responsibility of addressing funding shortfalls. The key attraction to defined contribution plans is that employer contributions are fixed as a percentage of pensionable earnings. But notice that contributions to target benefit plans, which are in the middle of the spectrum here, those contributions are also fixed. Funding shortfalls are addressed by reducing benefits, so there's no additional obligations that fall on the employer. Here we see that target benefit plans have most of the advantages of defined contribution and defined benefit, but without the huge disadvantage to employers of the cost, quantum, and volatility, and of bearing all the risk. So under defined contribution, you see that there are no legal liabilities, capped contributions, simplified accounting, that's a big one for employers. And on the upside for employees, you've got pooling of investment and longevity risk, which results in vastly better outcomes in terms of providing retirement income. Target benefit plans are not new. They have existed and thrived for decades in sectors like construction, where workers typically have multiple employers. There are studies that are actually called bang for the buck, more bang for the buck, that demonstrate that these pooled plans, including defined benefit and target benefit, that they perform much better and are much more efficient than defined contribution plans. This is because of the pooling of risk, longevity risk, and investment risk, and also economies of scale. You get professional investment management. It's not left to the individual employees. These professional investors have access to alternative asset classes that often produce better outcomes. So I now want to introduce you to two solid alternatives to capital accumulation plans, such as DC plans. And these alternatives produce vastly superior outcomes at no additional cost or risk to the employer. These are options to keep in mind for bargaining. They should come up at your bargaining table. In my opinion, there's no reason for any employer to persist with a regular defined contribution plan and not consider these options. The value and advantages should be obvious to employers, but our experience is that there's a surprising amount of resistance to what should be an easy decision. But let's take a look at a couple of these plans. The multi-sector pension plan is a union-sponsored fund. The trustees are appointed by two large unions, CUPE and the SEIU. Unlike most sector-specific target plans, in other words, often they're for the entertainment sector or construction, but the MSPP is actually open to most unionized employers across the country. It's growing. It has 15,000 members, 185 participating employers, assets of over 500 million, and it's well funded at 99%. This is the plan design. There's a monthly benefit formula, which is a fixed dollar amount of $1.55 for every $100 contributed by both employers and employees. This is a really important number here. I want you to remember this number: an annual pension accrual rate of 18.6% of contributions, which is significant. Another interesting fact is that there's actually a cap on contributions of 10.5%. And when you do the math, you can see that the reason for this is because at the benefit level that they're committed to here, when you do the math, it produces the maximum income tax limit of 2% accrual of your earnings. Also, the employer contributions can't be less than the employee contributions, and employees must contribute to the plan, but those contributions don't have to be the same. If you were to decide with your employer to choose the multi-sector pension plan, there's no buying service in the plan. You would participate on a go-forward basis only. So that raises the questions of what happens to your existing defined contribution account. So a couple of options: the employer could continue to sponsor it and employees would retain or even add to their defined contribution accounts, or the employer could wind up the plan and account balances would be transferred either into a locked-in retirement account or to purchase annuities, as we showed before. It's the same as if there were a termination of employment. This is very important. If you're at the bargaining table talking to your employer, this is what you would probably be saying to him or her. The multi-sector pension plan provides a better pension plan for employees at no additional cost to the employer. There's simplified accounting, so it's a single line item on your P&L. The employer's only obligation is to remit the negotiated percentage contribution to the plan. That essentially means that they can get out of the pension business. Now, what we have found in some conversations we've had with employers about these plans is that there are human resource professionals whose role mostly is to administer the pension plan, and they can start to feel very threatened about an option that might leave them without work to do. And that's just a hurdle that we always have to overcome in these discussions. This is really interesting stuff. This is an example of an analysis that was done by an actuary for a real employee whose name is not Jane Doe. We at the Society asked the actuary to compare retirement outcomes under a defined contribution plan with outcomes under the multi-sector plan under various investment return scenarios. This here on this slide is the basic information required for that analysis. As you can see with the red and the blue numbers, the difference is quite incredible. The investment return percentages over here, 4 and 6.5%, represent the annualized average return on investments. So in other words, 2 different scenarios. The annuity purchase rate assumption was 2% in the 4% scenario, and it was 4% in the 6.5% scenario. I have to say, and the actuary said, the results are highly sensitive to the assumptions used. The actual outcomes would be different. But the difference is sufficiently dramatic that the impact cannot be ignored. We will now look at another example of an alternative to a capital accumulation plan that does not result in any additional cost to the employer. In other words, another option. The CAT, I never remember what that stands for, College of Applied Arts and Technology, I think. Essentially, it is the big public sector jointly sponsored plan for the colleges in Ontario. It is a defined benefit plan. The CAT plan recently in 2018 launched a new design view as a more flexible alternative to the main CAT plan, which is what employers with defined contribution plans would be more likely to be interested in, is the DB plus design. It's been wildly successful, already attracted many, many new participating employers, and pretty much have taken the whole media sector. The CAT plan is very large, much larger than the MSPP, assets of almost 13 billion and extremely well funded, and we'll talk about the reason for that. The DB Plus model has the advantage of being backstopped by the main CAT plan, and this in combination with their very conservative funding policy allows them to call DB Plus a defined benefit plan, even in the context of fixed contributions. Remember, I asked you to look at that 18.6% number with the MSPP. Well, the corresponding number for the CAT D Plus is 8.5. And yes, that's a dramatic difference, and it does make a difference, but it's a nuanced difference, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the nuances come in the fact that it's 8.5% plus adjustments for wage growth and inflation that are conditional on the funding level of the plan. Like an RSP or a defined contribution plan, contributions are capped at 18% of pensionable earnings, but in the DB Plus model, the contributions are supposed to be equal, 50-50 basis. So if the employer is paying 6%, the employees pay 6% up to a maximum of 9% each. This is the same slide you saw for the multi-sector pension plan. These are your talking points at the bargaining table. The DB Plus plan also provides a better pension for employees at no additional cost to the employer. It allows for simplified accounting, and it limits the employer's obligation to just simply paying the required contributions. I should add that we engaged an actuary to compare these two plans, the MSPP and the DB Plus, under various scenarios. The actuaries found significant differences in outcomes, but it depended on the characteristics of the individual employees in terms of age and years of service. In other words, when you ask the question, which plan is better, the answer is, it depends. The pros and cons analysis you're going to see here flows from the actuarial study that we commissioned. So the MSPP has a much better accrual rate, as we saw at 18.6% compared to 8.5%. And because of that, there's more money up front for employees, retirees during their active early retirement years. And most people want more money to spend when they're in their 60s and 70s than when they're in their 80s and 90s, because they're able to do more. The 10.5% contribution cap actually does provide some benefits because you can diversify. You've got all of the rest of your room up to 18% to invest as you see fit. and save for your retirement on a tax deferred basis. And this is an interesting one too. There is no earnings cap on contributions. So this is of help to employees that are earning more than that maximum amount under the Income Tax Act. And it is a much better option for employees who are joining the plan mid to late career. Disadvantages to the multi-sector plan compared to the DB Plus. And this is a problem, lower commuted values for companies where there's a high degree of turnover and people want to leave the plan at some point and take their value out of it. The accrued benefits can be reduced. They are subject to government interference. Governments are kind of nervous about union-sponsored plans. We think there's no good reason for that. These plans perform extremely well, but they are tempted to impose conservative funding rules, and that can force benefits reductions. We work very hard to persuade them not to do that, and so far we've been successful with huge help from the construction industry. That the message is hands off our target plans, but those conversations continue. Also, the MSPP isn't as well funded as the DB Plus plan. It is a smaller plan, and it doesn't have the bells and whistles, including early retirement subsidies or subsidized joint and survivor or indexation of the benefit. And also, you can't import your defined contribution balances into this plan. So advantages to the DB Plus model over the MSPP is that the earned benefit cannot be reduced. I think it's an important caveat, though, that there's a major downside to that in terms of adequacy. The reason why they can't be reduced is because they have such a significant surplus that will never be used to provide retirement benefits that they can actually promise that there won't be a reduction. It's a much larger plan. It has higher commuted values for those who want to leave and take their value out of the plan. And it is possible to use your defined contribution account to buy credits in the DB Plus plan. So it isn't dollar for dollar. It does increase with age. It's more expensive for employees who are closer to retirement. Advantages to CATS DB Plus are that they have early retirement subsidies. They do subsidize the joint and survivor benefit. They do offer indexation and usually pay it. They've been endorsed by some pretty powerful players like an umbrella organization called Lawyers Financial. And under some scenarios, it's a better option for early career employees. Disadvantage, the main one being that much lower accrual rate due to extremely conservative funding policy, and that there's less money available during active early retirement years, and also that those annual contributions are capped at the ITA maximums. I'd like now to turn the discussion over to Renee, who has done quite a bit of work in this area of retirement plannings and has researched a couple of tools that can be extremely helpful in employees who are trying to figure out how to plan for their retirement. Over to you, Renee.
Thanks, Laura. So we were trying, when Laura was walking me through, oh, could you put the slides back up, Laura? Sorry, because I've got the links. That's okay.
Oh, you need the links, okay.
Yeah, when we were discussing, content for these sessions and trying to figure out, what types of things we felt might be helpful for folks as they're working through and trying to determine whether or not they have sufficient funds set aside between their pension and their own personal savings. One of the things that we realized was that some folks are not aware how to access or obtain their CPP values, for example. So one of the links that's provided in the presentation, which I can't see, but are you able to share it, Laura?
Well, maybe I didn't share. Did I not do that? Sorry.
It's okay. I think it's the first link on the screen, we'll know in a second, actually takes you to the Canadian government website that allows you to access allows you to access your CPP report, which provides you with your full CPP earnings or savings, I guess is a better way to put it, personalized. So I do realize, I think we've heard from a few people that have said that their employers tools for their pension, provides them with CPP estimates or CPP reports. This, I'm not too sure, because I know there's some variation across employers and across pension providers, about what's in those reports. So this is your actual CPP report. It's yours, personalized. So there's a link for that, so that you have access to that. And then once you have that information, if you'd like to sit down and actually do a quick, financial check on where you are now and based on where you'd like to be, there is a tool that's actually offered through the government. Again, it's a Canadian government website that's here, that the link is provided for. And it allows you to not only use key in your CPP, your forecasted CPP retirement benefit payment amount, any RRSP information you have, tax-free savings accounts, pretty much any investment that you've collected or contributed to along the way. And it does also allow you to key in pensions, or whether it was DC plan or DB plan, from not only your current employer, but from previous employers. So once you get all of that information into the tool, I'm making it sound complicated, but I did it, and I want to say it took me roughly 20 minutes to go through. Once you get the information in the tool, you have the ability to say how much money you would like monthly in retirement. And then what it will then, you put in your, you can play around with the tool and put in all sorts of different dates, and it will let you know if you're underfunded or overfunded, how much money you'll have access to, how much more money you need to save, and by when, type of thing. So it's a really great tool. And what I loved about it was the fact that it's not linked to any, financial institution or pension provider. It's literally just available for everybody, and it is very, very flexible and allows you to key in a lot of information. So if you were looking for some guidance, or just, like I said, a quick check to see if you're on track, that's a great place to start. But I will put warning all over it. This is not meant to be the entirety of anybody's retirement planning. It's simply provided as a tool for folks to check in and just see how they're doing, and if they're on track. So yeah, thanks, Laura. Okay, so are we at Q&A?
We are.
Okay. So there was a question that was sent out in the chat. So if anybody has questions for Laura, please go ahead and put them in the chat, and I will read them out loud as we receive them. So there was one that came through just as you were starting the presentation, Laura, but it was based on the rule question. So I think it's pertaining to calculations. So Srini has asked, for a person completing 12 years of service, of pensionable service by age 65, will the rule of 82 cause that person to work till 70?
The good news is absolutely not. It is a minimum standard in the legislation that they have to offer retirement, unreduced retirement, no later than the year that you turn, and the year that you turn age 65. So that's a statutory minimum, and the rule of 82 only gives an opportunity if you reach the rule before age 65 that you can still take your unreduced pension. It's a good question.
Thank you. And I don't know, Laura, if we covered it before, but clauses like the rule clauses that exist in the collective agreements, do these type of clauses exist for folks with defined contribution pensions?
Well, no, they don't. And that's because there's no such thing as a reduced or unreduced pension. The defined contribution pension plan doesn't promise anything in the way of a benefit. So what you do have with those plans, though, is the statutory requirement under the Pension Benefits Act that you have to be permitted to retire within 10 years of your normal date, which is age 65. So anybody who is 55 or older has an opportunity, if they want, to leave employment and convert their defined contribution account into a life income fund and start to withdraw funds on the schedule, the ITA schedule that is provided.
Okay. Okay, another question here for you. What happens to my pension if I leave the company? Do I just receive a payout?
No, what happens is you have some transfer options, which again are statutory requirements. But under a registered defined contribution plan, your options are limited to transfers into a locked-in account. So again, you can purchase a deferred annuity, you can transfer the funds to a new pension plan, or you can transfer the funds into a LIRA, a locked-in retirement account. So this is not the case though with a group RRSP where you have really unlimited options in terms of what you want to do with the funds.
And I guess too, it would also depend on where if you're moving from one employer to another, whether or not the employer allows you to transfer funds into their pension plan. Would that?
Well, that's exactly right. So for example, as we saw, if you're transferring into an employer that offers the multi-sector pension plan, you wouldn't have that option. But you would under the CAT DB Plus. So it really does vary. You're right. You have to have the cooperation of the receiving plan.
Yeah. Okay. And so I guess this is similar. If we were successful in negotiating a better plan, I guess so, like an improvement to a DC, so perhaps a target or defined benefit plan, what would happen to the money we've currently invested? Oh, sorry, we've invested in our current plan, which I think you've pretty much answered in the last question, right? Like it would be dependent on a number of things with the employer and.
Sorry, yeah, I was so busy reading this new question in the chat. Could you repeat what you just said?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. So if we were successful in negotiating for a better plan, so move from DC to a target or a defined benefit plan, what would happen to the money that we invested in our current DC plan?
Well, again, the options, it really depends on whether often it's individual choice. For example, CAT D Plus allows each individual to choose whether they want to use their defined contribution funds to buy service in the CAT DB Plus, or whether they just simply want to leave it in the employer's DC plan and continue to manage the money themselves. So there are some circumstances and scenarios where the employer is required to wind up the DC plan, in which case they would have to be looking at one of these other options, which would be a deferred annuity or a LIRA.
Okay, and I think I see the question that you from Jeff. Is it the?
I see the question too. So
okay, yeah, go ahead.
I know part of the answer, and had I known it was coming, I would have gotten up to speed on what they call the dropout years. It is the Canada Pension Plan that has that calculation, because the Ontario Old Age Security is really just an amount it's universal. Everybody gets it. It does start to claw back at a certain level of income, but it's not based on your earnings the way the Canada Pension Plan is. So yes, there are dropout years for years that you've spent raising children, and also you can drop out some of your lowest income years. I believe you need 40 years in order to get the maximum Canada pension, and it needs to be 40 years at the maximum pensionable earnings or higher in order to get the maximum Canada pension benefit. The rules are different and more complicated for this new expansion of the CPP, which was implemented in 2016 and is gradually being rolled out over time. It'll be complete, I believe, in 2025. And the rules are a little bit different in terms of these exemptions and exceptions. So that's the best I can do on that, but I don't quite have every detail.
Okay, I have a direct message question here, Laura. It's again a calculation related to the rule of 82. So I think we'll take this one and then close off questions about the rule calculations. But what happens if I retire at age 65 and I have a rule, I'm rule of 85 will be when I'm 69. So what happens to the pension? What happens to the medical benefits that kick in after the rule of 85?
Well, that's actually a good question. And Rule of 85 is simply not going to be applicable in this case, because there's more than one way to get to an unreduced pension. You can get to it before age 65 with your rule, but you also at age 65, or sometimes it's the the year ending, the end of the year that you turn at age 65, depending on how your plan is worded. you are also entitled to an unreduced pension. So you don't even have to worry about your rule anymore. Now, in terms of your health and dental benefits, they're not tied in any way to the pension plan except through collective bargaining. And that's where we have rules that are really very diverse across the various society locals. Some of them have been arbitration awards, some of them have been bargain decisions, but there are some plans that do link entitlement and eligibility for post-retirement benefits to the decisions you make around retirement and to your service. So for example, for some locals, if you take the commuted value of your pension instead of a monthly benefit, you would not get your health and dental benefits in retirement. Some locals require a certain vesting period. So you would require, 7, 10, 15 years of service before you'd be eligible. So the rules really are very diverse, and it's your local bargaining teams that need to make decisions with the employers about what's appropriate.
Thanks, Laura. One last question. So if my DC plan contribution is calculated based on my earnings, does this include bonuses or incentive pay?
Again, that's a matter for collective bargaining. So that's going to be between the local and the employer in terms of how to define the term pensionable earnings. I would say the most common approach is to limit it to base earnings, but there are certain types of compensation schemes where there's variable compensation and more of the compensation is put at risk in terms of a bonus structure, where some or all of that bonus could be pensionable, but it really does vary.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left. Don't see any more questions in the chat, so we can give folks a few minutes.
Got some thank yous coming in. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Oh, here. If you hit your factor at 52, is anything affected?
I think it's cause for celebration. That's a nice number. But the answer is no. What that means is that you are entitled to an unreduced pension. So maybe it's important to take a minute to talk about that, though, because if you're 52 years old, unreduced pension means based on the amount of service that you have accrued at that time. So in this case, the individual is going to have 30 years service, and the pension will be based on the 30 years. But if you have a plan, and many of them are open to further accruals past 30 years or 35 years in some cases, you can still earn pension credits and increase your pension just simply by working longer. And depending on whether people have children in university or whatever other financial needs they might have, it might be smart for them to actually continue accruing service. So the unreduced really only relates to the fact that the full pension formula is applied to the final average salary without any reduction. If you do retire early, meaning before age 65, and you have not hit your factor or your rule, you can still retire if you're 55 years old, but there are discounts applied to the pension. And you can find tables in your pension plan text or your brochure that show the kinds of discounts that apply. Most of them are subsidized, meaning that if you have, say, 15 years of service or 20 years of service, that the reduction will be less drastic than if you had less service. So these are subsidies that do apply to early retirement. They're not statutory. Those are also have to be bargained.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, well, we have we're just under 2 minutes before 1 o'clock, so I want to make sure that we wrap up in time so that folks aren't missing out and they can get back to their work. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much to Laura for all of her hard work pulling all of these presentations together. It's just so interesting. I find pensions interesting. I don't know, maybe it's the math lover in me, but these sessions have been super informative. I really hope that everybody that's on the call has enjoyed them. And I also want to thank everybody for taking out some time. I know multi-day events can be a little bit challenging to schedule in. So thank you to all of you for finding time in your busy schedules to attend, and hopefully you've learned a little bit more about the pensions. We're getting all sorts of thank yous coming in, Laura.
Nice. Thank you. My pleasure.
So we don't have any more materials to present today. These sessions, again, will be posted on the Society's e-learning site later this week. And you should receive a notice, provided that you registered, you'll receive an email. If you didn't register and you might have stuck a link from somebody else to get in today, not to worry, the information will be posted on the Society's website for anybody who wasn't able to attend, with instructions on how to access the information. So once again, thank you all for attending, and I'm going to stop recording and wish you all a very happy Tuesday. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Take care.